When people talk about Melbourne, they talk about culture, lifestyle, and opportunity. But if you are planning a move today, there is one question people keep asking quietly. Is Melbourne still safe? And is it still worth it? This question surfaces in private messages, in late-night research sessions, in conversations with family members questioning the decision. It's not the question people ask publicly because it sounds pessimistic or fearful, but it's the question weighing on minds when real money and real futures are at stake. The internet amplifies certain narratives, crime reports, negative experiences, warnings from people who left or never lived there at all. These stories spread faster than the mundane reality of millions of people simply living their normal lives without incident or drama. So the question persists, creating doubt where there might not need to be any, but also demanding honest examination rather than defensive dismissal. Melbourne's reputation has shifted in recent years, not necessarily because the city changed dramatically, but because the conversation around it changed, because certain incidents received outsized attention, and because people planning international moves naturally gravitate toward worst-case scenarios when making decisions that feel irreversible. Understanding whether Melbourne is still safe and still worth it requires looking past the noise to examine what daily life actually feels like for the people living it right now, not the people commenting on it from elsewhere or the headlines designed to generate clicks rather than provide context. That's what this exploration aims to provide, a grounded perspective that acknowledges the concerns without sensationalizing them, that takes the question seriously without pretending the answer is simple or universal for everyone considering this significant life decision. This question is not coming from panic. It is coming from people making real decisions. Students, workers, families, people comparing cities. Headlines travel fast, but daily reality rarely gets the same attention. When someone is choosing between Melbourne and other global cities, they're weighing multiple factors: cost, opportunity, quality of life, and yes, safety. A few high-profile incidents can disproportionately influence that calculation, even if statistically they don't represent the norm. Social media amplifies negative experiences because they're more engaging than positive ones. Someone who had a bad experience in Melbourne will post about it extensively. Thousands of people who had perfectly fine days don't post anything at all because normalcy isn't content. This creates a distorted picture where the exceptions become more visible than the rule, where problems get more attention than the absence of problems. People researching Melbourne encounter this skewed information environment and struggle to calibrate what's genuine concern versus what's algorithmic amplification of edge cases. The question about safety isn't irrational. It's a natural response to information overload combined with the high stakes of international relocation. People want to know if the concerns they're reading about match what they'll actually experience, or if they're being misled by selective reporting that makes every city look more dangerous than it is when you're consuming content about it rather than living in it. The challenge is finding reliable information that comes from sustained experience rather than brief visits, dramatic incidents, or ideological perspectives that have an interest in portraying Melbourne in particularly positive or negative light, regardless of the nuanced reality. Safety is not only about reports or numbers, it is about routine. Walking to the tram, being out in the evening, feeling comfortable in public spaces. For most residents, daily life in Melbourne still feels structured and predictable. The actual experience of moving through the city day after day provides a different perspective than statistics or news reports can capture. People go to work, take public transport, walk through neighborhoods, sit in parks, eat at restaurants, and do all the ordinary things that constitute daily life without incident the vast majority of the time. The sense of safety comes from accumulated experience, noticing that streets stay busy in the evening, that public transport feels monitored and maintained, that people of all ages move through spaces with visible comfort rather than vigilance. This doesn't mean nothing bad ever happens, which would be an absurd claim for any major city anywhere in the world. It means that for most people, most of the time, Melbourne functions as a place where you can live normally without constant awareness of danger or threat. Women walk alone after dark. Families bring children to public events. Elderly residents navigate the city independently. These behaviors indicate a baseline comfort level that exists separate from whatever headlines might be circulating at any given moment. The daily reality includes occasional uncomfortable moments, areas that feel less safe than others, and times when extra caution makes sense, exactly like every other major city globally. What matters is whether those moments dominate the experience or represent rare exceptions to generally reliable safety. And for most Melbourne residents across most neighborhoods, the exceptions remain exceptional rather than becoming the new normal that defines daily life. Melbourne is not one experience. Different suburbs offer different lifestyles. People who settle well usually choose areas that match how they live, not just what they hear online. Melbourne sprawls across a massive geographic area containing dozens of distinct neighborhoods, each with different demographics, amenities, price points, and characteristics. Asking if Melbourne is safe is like asking if London or Los Angeles is safe. The question is too broad to answer meaningfully without specifying which parts you're talking about and what your lifestyle involves. Someone living in a quiet family suburb 30 minutes from the CBD will have a completely different experience than someone in a high-density urban area near nightlife districts. Neither experience is more valid or real than the other, but they're different enough that generalizations about the entire city become almost meaningless. The suburbs that attract families, places with good schools, parks, community centers, tend to feel very safe and stable, exactly what you'd expect from residential areas designed around child rearing and long-term home ownership. The inner-city areas have more visible homelessness, more nightlife-related incidents, more density-driven friction, but also more energy, culture, and convenience. Most people's experience of Melbourne depends enormously on where specifically they live, what their daily patterns involve, and how their lifestyle intersects with the city's geography. Someone working from home in Camberwell has minimal exposure to whatever is happening in the CBD late at night. Someone living in Footscray faces different considerations than someone in Brighton. Understanding this geographic diversity matters when evaluating whether Melbourne works for you. The question isn't just, is Melbourne safe, but is the specific part of Melbourne where I can afford to live, and that matches my lifestyle safe enough for my comfort level and priorities. Many newcomers notice how active public spaces are, how transport connects the city, and how people move with confidence. These details shape how safe a place feels more than headlines do. The lived experience of arriving in Melbourne often surprises people who've been consuming negative content about it online. They expect to feel immediately on guard, but instead they notice cafes full of people at all hours, parks busy with families and joggers, trams running reliably and filled with commuters not looking particularly vigilant or concerned. The gap between expectation and reality can be significant, which suggests the narrative about Melbourne has moved somewhat ahead of the actual conditions on the ground. This doesn't mean every newcomer has a positive experience. Some do encounter problems, some do feel uncomfortable in certain situations, and some do ultimately decide Melbourne isn't for them. But many find the city functions normally in ways that contradict the impression they'd formed from research. They walk through neighborhoods that had concerning reputations online and find them perfectly ordinary. They use public transport they'd been warned about and encounter nothing more threatening than crowded carriages during peak hour. They go out in the evening expecting problems and instead just have normal nights out like they would in any other major city. The confidence visible in long-term residents matters. People who've lived in Melbourne for years or decades and still move through it comfortably signal something about the actual risk environment versus the perceived one. If locals were genuinely afraid or if conditions had deteriorated dramatically, their behavior would reflect that through visible caution, avoidance of certain areas, or changes in routine. The fact that daily patterns continue largely unchanged suggests the concerns, while not entirely baseless, may be somewhat overstated relative to the actual lived experience most people have in the city day to day. For many people, Melbourne still offers balance. Work, education, culture, and lifestyle continue to attract people who value long-term stability rather than short-term hype. The question of worth depends entirely on what you're comparing Melbourne against and what you're optimizing for in your life. If you're comparing it to smaller, quieter cities with less diversity and fewer opportunities, but potentially easier social dynamics, Melbourne might feel overwhelming or not worth the trade-offs. If you're comparing it to other global cities with similar opportunities but higher costs or more intense pace, Melbourne might represent excellent value. The city continues to function as a major economic and cultural center with strong universities, diverse employment opportunities, established immigrant communities, and infrastructure that supports a high quality of life for people who can afford it and who match well with its particular character. The cost of living is high and rising, which affects whether it's worth it as much as safety concerns do. The weather is genuinely challenging for some people. The gray winters and unpredictable conditions don't suit everyone's psychology or physical comfort needs. The isolation from other major cities and the tyranny of distance for anyone with ties to other continents creates challenges that no amount of local quality can fully overcome. But for people seeking a stable Western city with relatively strong social services, decent work-life balance, multicultural character, and room to build a life without the intensity of places like New York or London, Melbourne continues to deliver on those promises for many residents. The question of worth is ultimately personal. It depends on your priorities, your alternatives, your risk tolerance, your financial situation, and your lifestyle preferences more than on any objective measure of whether Melbourne is good or bad in some universal sense. Melbourne today is not defined by one story. It is defined by daily life. If you are considering a move, understanding how the city actually feels matters most. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more grounded global perspectives. The real Melbourne exists in the accumulated experience of millions of ordinary days, not in the handful of incidents that make headlines or the extreme opinions that dominate comment sections. It's a city with genuine strengths and genuine weaknesses, with areas that feel comfortable and areas that feel less so, with opportunities for some people and frustrations for others. The safety question that prompted this exploration doesn't have a simple yes or no answer because safety isn't binary. It exists on a spectrum that varies by location, time, circumstance, and individual perception. What matters more than declaring Melbourne definitively safe or unsafe is understanding the actual risk environment relative to other options you're considering, relative to your specific lifestyle and tolerance levels, and relative to the honest experiences of people living there, rather than the curated narratives of people with particular agendas or limited exposure. Melbourne remains a functional major city where hundreds of thousands of people, including many immigrants and international students, continue to build lives and generally feel comfortable doing so. That doesn't mean it's perfect or that everyone will thrive there or that concerns about specific issues are invalid. It means the reality is more nuanced than either the promotional material or the warning posts would suggest. If you're considering Melbourne, the best approach is to look past the extremes. Talk to actual residents about their daily experience, visit if possible to get your own sense of how it feels, and make decisions based on your specific needs and circumstances rather than on generalized claims about whether the city is worth it for some imaginary average person who doesn't exist. Every major city involves trade-offs. Understanding Melbourne's specific trade-offs honestly, without panic but also without dismissing legitimate concerns, gives you the information needed to decide whether those particular trade-offs work for your particular situation and priorities.